The barking wouldn't stop. Deep, guttural, almost violent. Ranger, the canine German shepherd, stood planted in the center aisle of St. Augustine's church, eyes locked on the black lacquered coffin at the altar. His leash trembled in the trembling. Hands of Officer Hale, but the dog wasn't listening anymore. Not to Hale, not to the priest, not to anyone. People had turned in their pews. Some whispered, others stared, frozen in silent confusion. The organist had paused mid-hymn, fingers suspended above the keys like a ghost had whispered in her ear. And at the pulpit, Father Ellison clutched the open Bible just a little too tightly. The barking grew louder, echoing through the domed ceilings. Ranger didn't move forward, he didn't retreat. He just stood there, fixated on that coffin, like he could see something no one else could. And then, it happened. The coffin moved, just slightly. A twitch, a shuffle, enough to make the bouquet atop it tilt and drop a single white lily to the ground. Gasps rippled like a shock wave through the pews. Officer Hale yanked back on the leash, but Ranger lunged, claws screeching against the marble floor as he dragged Hale 3 feet forward. A growl rolled from deep inside the animal's chest. Not fear, not panic. Warning. Behind the casket, Father Ellison's face turned pale. No one said a word. Not until an old man in the 3rd pew, cane tapping, stood up and whispered to no one. In particular, is someone in there? The silence that followed felt like it could collapse the walls. Officer Hale, pale as chalk, looked toward the family. The deceased son, Daniel Cross, sat stiff-backed in the front pew, a black suit hugging his lean frame. He hadn't flinched once during the entire outburst, just stared at the coffin, jaw locked, knuckles white. Ranger turned his head for a split second and locked eyes with Daniel, and for just a breath of a moment the dog whimpered, almost apologetically, then barked again, sharper this time. 3 barks, fast, deliberate. Everyone turned toward Father Ellison. His hands were shaking now. I think we should continue with the service, he stammered. But Ranger barked. Again, 3 barks, and then he sat, ears perked, head straight, tail stiff, like a soldier awaiting orders. Officer Hale whispered, "I've never seen him do that before." Daniel stood up, slowly, his voice calm but hollow. "Open it." The priest flinched. "I'm sorry?" "Open the coffin," Daniel repeated. There was something terrifying in how still his voice was. Not rage, not grief, just silence with edges. The kind of silence that meant someone already knew something they shouldn't. Father Ellison swallowed hard. "It's not appropriate." "Open it," Daniel said again, his voice cutting sharper this time. Behind him, Ranger growled, low and long. Hale looked at the priest, then at Daniel. "If this is some kind of—" "Do it," Daniel said. "Now." A couple of men stepped forward hesitantly. Pallbearers. One of them, shaking, reached for the lid. His fingers hovered, unsure, until the dog gave one short bark that made him jolt into motion. The lid creaked. Wood groaned. The church held its breath, and when the coffin opened, it wasn't empty, but it wasn't him either. The face inside was wrong. The nose, the jawline, the scars. Everyone in the room had seen Mr. Henry Cross's face in the papers. The infamous businessman, the war veteran, the accused fraudster who'd died of heart failure just 5 days ago. But this wasn't Henry Cross. It was someone else, someone no one could name, a dead man in Henry's suit. Daniel didn't blink. He just stared and whispered, "I knew it." The whispers rose to chaos. "Who is that? Wait, where's Henry? Why would someone—" And in the middle of it all, Ranger lay down at the foot of the coffin, calm, still, almost satisfied. Officer Hale was still frozen, mouth ajar. How did the dog know? But Daniel was already walking away from the pews. Slow, quiet, eyes forward. He didn't need the priest to speak, because he knew the truth he'd buried 13 years ago was about to claw its way back up. He knew this funeral wasn't an ending. It was a warning. 13 years. That's how long Daniel Cross had gone without seeing his father's face. And now, not even death had the decency to make it real. As the church erupted behind him, whispers, rising voices, phones clicking to life, Daniel stepped outside into the cold April air, his fists clenched so tight his palms stung. The sun was too bright, too cheerful, like it didn't know who the hell Henry Cross was. But the K9, he knew. Daniel heard Ranger's claws tapping behind him. The leash had slipped from Officer Hale's grip. The dog had chosen who to follow. A soft growl rumbled in Ranger's throat. Not at Daniel, not anymore. The dog had followed him like a ghost chasing closure, and somehow Daniel wasn't surprised. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. He'd quit 5 years ago, but this day earned a relapse, and stared out across the cemetery. The rows of graves, the fake peace. It all looked like a lie now. Just like Henry's death certificate, and suddenly Daniel was 10 again, standing in the hallway, ear pressed to the door, listening to fists crash against bone, and his mother's voice crying his name between sobs. "You don't talk back to me." "Crash," I said, "get out of my sight." He didn't cry then. He wouldn't let himself. Back then, Daniel believed monsters were real. Later, he learned they just wore suits and smiled at reporters and died peacefully in their sleep before the law could touch them. But this changed everything. If the man in the coffin wasn't his father, then where the hell was Henry Cross? And why had the damn dog known? Daniel exhaled smoke and looked at Ranger. The dog sat at attention, eyes never leaving his, military-trained, owned by Henry himself, transferred to Officer Hale just a year ago after Henry's passing, which meant Daniel knelt, looking the dog in the eyes for the first time. "You knew," he whispered. Ranger didn't bark, didn't growl. He just reached forward and nudged something gently against Daniel's knee. It was a small worn leather strap. A collar tag. Daniel picked it up. On the underside was a number, scratched faintly in the metal. Coordinates? No, a locker number. And beneath it, the tiniest etched symbol, a cross, burning. His breath caught. He hadn't seen that symbol since his childhood bedroom, back when Henry used to run lessons in the basement, back when Daniel used to wake up with bruises and no memory of how he'd gotten them. Back when Mother used to cry in the laundry room, thinking no one heard. He'd thought it was all over, buried. But maybe monsters didn't die. Maybe they just changed faces. And Ranger had been there the whole time, trained to obey Henry. But maybe, somewhere deep in those sharp eyes, the dog had turned on his master. Daniel stood, fists clenched again, but not with fear this time. This wasn't a funeral anymore, it was a damn message. One Henry had spent years preparing, from beyond the grave, or worse, from somewhere he was still watching. The locker was in a forgotten corner of the city's oldest train station, Terminal 6, dust-covered. Padlock rusted shut like it hadn't been touched in years. Ranger sat beside Daniel like a statue, still and alert. Daniel's hands shook as he typed the code etched into the collar tag. 0624 click. The locker creaked open with a metallic groan. Inside, a leather-bound notebook, a silver USB drive, and a single Polaroid photo. Daniel pulled the photo. First a boy, 7 years old, dressed in Sunday clothes, crying, standing in front of what looked like a basement wall, spray-painted with that same burning cross symbol, and behind him, a shadow, too tall, too wide, not fully visible but standing in the dark like it belonged there. Daniel felt the air drain from his lungs. It was him. It was his childhood. That photo had been taken in their home. The old one, before his mother disappeared. The basement Henry had sealed shut after the incident, but who took the photo? He flipped it, a note scrawled in pencil on the back. "I told you I'd rise again." Daniel dropped it like it burned. Ranger growled. The notebook came next. Its pages were filled with diagrams, military training routines, psychological tests, weird scribbles about trigger phrases, and obedience therapy. But then it shifted. Midway through, the notes became darker. Paranoid, unhinged. The priest is compromised. They all watched. They said nothing. "He'll expose me unless I bury the proof. I need a witness who can't speak." Daniel's hands froze on that line. A witness who can't speak. His mind raced. A child, a mute. Or, his gaze dropped to Ranger. No, it couldn't be. He flipped to the final page. It was a list, names, dates, places, all coded, except the last line. If Daniel finds this, it means they failed. He was never supposed to survive. A sharp thud echoed behind him. Ranger had backed away from the locker, growling toward the far end of the station. Someone else was there. Daniel sat in his college dorm, staring at a headline. Businessman Henry Cross cleared of all charges in alleged abuse case. No witnesses testified. The world moved on, but Daniel hadn't. His mother's face haunted him. How fast her file had been closed. How the coroner said she fell down the stairs. Despite bruises, cracked ribs, and ligature marks, they called it a coincidence. Daniel called it murder, but he never had proof. Not until today. Back in the present, Daniel slammed the locker shut and backed away just as a figure rounded the corner. Not police, not a reporter, someone else. He wore a black coat, no badge, face half-shadowed, but the second he saw Ranger, he stopped cold and reached slowly into his coat pocket. Daniel didn't wait. "Run," he whispered. More to the dog than himself, he took off through the terminal, boots slamming tile, breath ragged. Behind him, Ranger kept pace like a machine. Behind them, the man followed without hurry. Like he already knew where Daniel was going. Back at St. Augustine's church, Father Ellison paced the altar, eyes darting to the closed coffin, now under police lockdown. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He hadn't expected the dog. He hadn't expected Daniel. He pulled out a small flip phone, the kind that couldn't be traced, and dialed a number he hadn't touched in 10 years. It rang once, a voice answered. "Mail, cold. You said it was handled." Father Ellison swallowed. "It was. But—" The dog reacted. "He knows." A pause. Then end it. Click. The line went dead. The priest stared at the crucifix hanging above. The pulpit. "Forgive me," he whispered, "for what I'm about to do. Safe for now." Windows locked, curtains drawn. Daniel slammed the USB into his laptop. The screen blinked, and a video loaded, grainy, night vision, basement footage. At first, just silence, then movement. A child out maybe 5 out tied to a chair. Crying, the camera zoomed. And then Henry Cross stepped into frame, smiling. Behind him was another man, face hidden. Robes. Daniel froze. The priest? No. Taller. Stronger. But something about the burning cross stitched onto his sleeve made Daniel's stomach twist. What the hell had his father been part of? The video kept playing. Henry paced behind the crying child, mumbling to the man in robes. The voices were muffled, but one phrase kept repeating, distorted, yet chilling in its clarity. "Make them obedient." Daniel's heart thudded. His mind ran in circles. This wasn't just about abuse, it was something else, something rehearsed, repeated. Then the camera jolted. Ranger appeared, younger, leaner, dragged in by a leash, resisting. Daniel's chest tightened. They brought the dog into that room, forced it to watch. And then the screen glitched and one final frame frozen in static. The man in robes turned toward the lens. Half his face caught the light. Daniel hit pause. His stomach twisted. "It's he," was Father Ellison. By the time Daniel reached the church again, the sun was low and the street quiet. Ranger led the way, nose to the ground like he'd memorized a scent no one else could trace. The side door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were dimmed. Pews empty, coffin still sealed. Father Ellison stood at the altar, hands folded, lips moving in silent prayer. Daniel stepped forward. "You were there. You—" The priest didn't flinch. "You helped him," Daniel said, voice cracking. "You stood beside him and watched." Ellison opened his eyes. "You don't understand what your father was," he said quietly. "None of us did. Not at first." Then, "Explain the video," Daniel snapped, tossing the USB onto the altar. Ellison looked down. Slowly he picked it up, turned it in his fingers. "I told him it would destroy everything," he murmured. "But he wanted control, obedience, total silence. He believed the world was full of chaos and that only extreme measures could fix it." "And you helped?" "No," Ellison said. I tried to stop it. Lies. Daniel could see it in his eyes, that same calm he used in sermons, the kind that could cover a scream. You kept the coffin closed, Daniel said. You didn't let anyone see the body, because there wasn't one. The priest was silent. You buried an empty box, Daniel hissed, or someone else's body. Ellison turned to the cross behind him. Do you know what it's like, he whispered, to serve someone you feared more than God? Daniel stared at him. You're still serving him. Ellison turned back. His eyes were different now, resigned. I told them this would happen, he said, that the dog would remember. And then he reached under the altar. Daniel stepped back instinctively, but Ellison didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a box, and from inside, a stack of documents, sealed. In a folder marked Project Lazarus, Daniel froze. He flipped it open. Inside, in military contracts, psychological experiment briefs, all bearing Henry's name, and at the bottom, a signature. Daniel Cross. His signature. Forged. You were a test case, Ellison said softly. He planned it. From the beginning, everything, even your defiance. Daniel couldn't breathe. He stumbled back, mind unraveling. It's not just you, Ellison continued. There are others. Your father had plans for a program, obedience reconditioning through trauma and surveillance. Ranger was the prototype. Daniel's knees nearly buckled. And the church? He rasped. Funding, the priest said. Cover. Confession makes people vulnerable. We collected secrets, tracked behavior. The K9s were placed with targeted families. He wanted to know how far loyalty could stretch. Daniel looked at Ranger, sitting silently, eyes locked on Ellison like he was waiting for a command, but the leash was gone now. The priest stepped forward. I kept the evidence, he said, hoping one day someone would survive long enough to use it. Daniel couldn't speak. Ellison placed the folder in his hands. But it comes with a price, he said. If you take this, they'll come for you. Daniel looked at the man. I think they already are. And then the lights went out, a crash behind them. Daniel spun. Ranger growled. 3 figures entered through the back. Black coats, earpieces, guns drawn. Daniel Cross, one said, voice hollow through a mask. Come with us. Ranger lunged before they could finish. Chaos exploded. The first shot rang. Through the stained glass window, Daniel dropped to the floor, clutching the folder. Ellison screamed. Ranger collided with the nearest man, a flash of teeth and fury. More shots. Daniel crawled behind the pews, blood pounding in his ears. He saw one of the men go down, throat torn. Ranger didn't stop. The second man grabbed Ellison, gun pressed to his temple, dropped the folder. He shouted. Daniel rose slowly, folder in hand. Do it, the man screamed, but Ellison whispered, Don't. Daniel hesitated, a moment of silence. Then, bang. The shot echoed. The priest fell. Daniel screamed. Ranger roared. The last man turned, tried to run, didn't make it. The church fell still, just breathing, and blood and Ranger standing over the last body, muzzle stained. Daniel dropped to his knees beside Ellison. The priest stared at the ceiling, blood pooling beneath him. Finish. It, he whispered. End what he started. Then, nothing. Silence. Daniel closed the priest's eyes, and for the first time since the barking began, the church was truly silent. The folder sat open on the motel bed. Printouts, flash drives, names. Daniel. Moved like a ghost, hands trembling as he organized the pages, each one confirming what he already feared. Project Lazarus had been real. His childhood wasn't just haunted by memory, but by design. Beside him, Ranger slept, tail twitching, breath slow. The wounds from the church were deep, but not fatal. The vet said he was lucky. Daniel didn't believe in luck anymore. He looked at the papers again. 39 names, most redacted. But one wasn't. Dr. Elias Wren, Behavioral Sciences, decommissioned in 2014. Last known location, Riverside Psychiatric Facility. Daniel highlighted it. If anyone could confirm the program's existence or its end, it was Wren. He dropped onto the mattress, exhaustion heavier than fear. It's done, he told himself. The priest was dead. The agents were gone. He had the evidence. Maybe it was over. Maybe tomorrow he could go to the press, anonymously, leak everything. Maybe he could finally bury his father's ghost. The room was silent, too silent, the kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl. Ranger stirred. Daniel's eyes flicked to the window. Nothing, just shadows. He closed his eyes. Sleep came hard, but it came. The next morning. The world looked ordinary. Again blue sky, morning traffic, cheap motel coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. Daniel packed the folder into a backpack. Ranger limped behind him, protective as ever. He turned on the TV, half listening while zipping his jacket. Breaking news. 3 bodies were found inside St. Augustine's Church late last night, including Father Matthew Ellison. Investigators are calling it a botched robbery. Daniel froze. The only witness, a former altar boy, claims a masked gunman entered during prayer and opened fire. There is no mention of any surviving clergy or other persons on site. The lie stung more than the truth. No mention of him, or the dog, or the folder. They were already rewriting it, erasing him. The report ended with a photo, grainy, low-res. It was the church, but something about it more stopped him cold. He leaned closer, behind the yellow tape, behind the shadows. A man, in a dark coat, standing in the ruins, looking directly at the camera, not blurred, not obscured. Henry Cross. Alive. Daniel stumbled back. The folder fell from his hands. Pages spilled. Ranger barked once. Loud, sharp, alarmed. Daniel's heart seized. The window behind him exploded inward. Glass, shards, a flashbang. White light swallowed the room. Then black. Pain arrived before sound, a dull throb. Then ringing. Then cold. Daniel's eyes fluttered open. White ceiling, metal walls. Dim fluorescent lights flickering overhead like dying stars. He wasn't in the motel anymore, his wrists strapped to a chair, plastic ties cutting deep, his mouth dry, blood on his lip. A hum echoed through the room. Machinery. A vent. The sound of somewhere meant to be hidden. Ranger was gone. That realization alone nearly broke him. He tried to speak, but his voice barely scraped through. Where? Then footsteps. Calm. Unhurried. The door opened, and his father walked in, alive, whole, unaged, wearing the same watch he was buried in. Henry Cross. Not a hallucination. Not a dream. He pulled up a chair and sat across from his son like they were sharing coffee. "Hello, Daniel," he said. The voice wasn't cold. It was careful, measured, like a scientist addressing a subject. Daniel's throat tightened. "You're dead," he croaked. Henry smiled. "No," he said. "I just stopped existing in the world you knew." A pause. Then, "And you did well. The dog performed even better." Daniel shook his head. You killed them. All of them." Henry tilted his head. "Collateral necessary." His gaze didn't waver. "You were never supposed to see the folder," he continued. "Father Ellison overestimated your resolve, but I admit, you surprised me." Daniel pulled at the restraints. "You tortured children," he hissed. "You used your own family, your own dog, as a weapon." "I engineered obedience," Henry replied. "In a world spinning out of control, I gave people structure, purpose. You should be proud you were patient zero." Daniel felt bile rise in his throat. "You broke me." "No," Henry said calmly. "I built you. Every scar, every defiance, every moment of rebellion, all calculated, all necessary." He leaned in. "And now you've proven capable of surviving beyond the design." Daniel stared at him in horror. "You want me to join you?" Henry smiled faintly. "You already did, long ago, you just don't remember." Silence, then a small screen beside Henry lit up. Footage, grainy, black and white. A younger Daniel, 12, maybe 13, in a white room, hooked to wires, sitting beside a cage. Inside, a small, terrified puppy, Ranger. A voice off-screen asked him, "Do you love him, Daniel?" Daniel on screen nodded, eyes wide with tears. The voice continued, "Then teach him what fear feels like, so he can protect you from it." Daniel turned away from the screen, his body trembling. The memory crashed back like a flood. The screams, the tests. The day Ranger bit his own handler to protect him. They didn't rescue each other. They were designed for each other. "Why show me this?" Daniel whispered. "To remind you what's possible," Henry said. "What we created, and what you can." "Finish?" Daniel looked up, eyes full of 1,000 broken things. "I'd rather die." Henry nodded. "I thought you'd say that." Then he stood. "Let's see if the dog feels the same." He walked out. The door closed behind him with a hiss, and Daniel, bound, helpless, reeling, screamed into the silence. The cell didn't have clocks, just white light, humming endlessly. Time lost meaning. Daniel didn't sleep. He waited to hear Ranger's bark again, waited for Henry's boots, waited to forget the screen. That boy, that cage, that command. But the memory wouldn't go. He had taught Ranger to fear. And that fear had become loyalty. That loyalty had become violence, and the world had applauded. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't Henry. It was a woman. Mid-40s, military-bearing, badge stitched to her coat, Dr. Evelyn Shaw. She didn't offer a smile. "Just a clipboard. You're scheduled for transport in 20, she said. "After that, we either wipe your mind clean or turn you into what your father wanted." Daniel didn't respond. She took a breath. "But there's another option." He raised an eyebrow. "You leak everything, burn it down, disappear." Now he looked at her. "I'm listening." The facility wasn't just a bunker. It was a burial ground for secrets, 4 levels underground, each more secure than the last. Dr. Shaw led Daniel down with a stolen clearance badge and a dangerous gamble. That Ranger was still alive, and still loyal. As they walked, she whispered fragments of the past. "Your father ran behavioral weapons trials. Ranger was Phase 1. Daniel's voice was cold. "What was Phase 2? "Children." She showed him a room. Glass walls, one way. Mirrors. Inside were others. Some no older than 12, some near his age, all wearing collars, all silent, watching, breathing as one. "Obedience," Shaw said. "Not through punishment, but through engineered trauma, pair bonding." Each of them had a protector, an animal, a person, someone they were programmed to love and lose over and over. Daniel's stomach turned. "And me?" "You were the control," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to survive." They reached sub-level 4. The lab was dark, humming with low power, glass tanks, cold steel, IV bags, and in the corner, a cage. Inside, Ranger, alive, sedated, shackled, but his eyes opened the moment Daniel entered. No growl, no bark, just recognition. Daniel dropped to his knees outside the bars. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't protect you." Ranger pressed his head against the steel, tail thumping weakly. Then Dr. Shaw handed Daniel a key. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "After that, the backup team arrives, and they won't care who you are." Daniel unlocked the cage. Ranger staggered out, legs shaky, body bruised, but as soon as he touched Daniel, he stood tall again. "Ready, come on, boy," Daniel whispered. "Let's finish it." They ran, alarms triggered. Red lights flooded the hall, security flooded the stairwells. Daniel grabbed Shaw's keycard and ducked into maintenance access, a forgotten shaft that hadn't been scanned in years. Behind them, to gunfire. Ahead, a single elevator. Ranger leapt first. Daniel followed. They burst out on the surface, the woods beyond the compound blinking under moonlight. Freedom, but it wasn't over. They found shelter hours later, a shuttered ranger station at the edge of a frozen lake. Daniel collapsed inside, locking the door behind them. Ranger curled beside the stove, ribs rising slow, and Daniel pulled the folder from his jacket. It was time. He uploaded everything: video, voice memos, test logs, Ellison's final confession, Shaw's testimony. Within minutes, it was out, leaked to dozens of servers, news outlets. Whistleblower forums. There'd be no covering it this time. Project Lazarus would rot in daylight. Daniel sat back and wept. Not for his father, not for himself, for Ranger, for every. Bark that had meant, "Please see what I've seen." Morning came quietly. Snow fell in slow spirals, and then a vehicle pulled up. Black SUV, unmarked. Daniel stood, readied himself. The door opened. Henry stepped out. No guards, no guns, just the same unreadable calm. He walked up to the cabin. Daniel opened the door before he could knock. "You lose," he said. Henry didn't argue. "I always knew you'd break the chain," he said. "That was the point." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Henry stepped inside, looked at Ranger, nodded, once respectfully, then turned to his son. "You weren't the control," he said. "You were the virus, silence." "What?" "I didn't need another obedient soldier," Henry said. "I needed the one person capable of destroying the system I built, someone close enough to be shaped by it, hurt by it, and immune to it." Daniel shook his head. "No." "You're lying." Henry stepped forward. "Who do you think gave Shaw your location? Opened the blind doors? Gave Ellison the files?" Daniel's breath caught. No, it couldn't be." Henry smiled. "You killed my legacy, just like I wanted." Daniel stared, throat dry. "Why?" Henry's eyes darkened. "Because no one else could. Not the church, not the government. But a grieving son haunted by a dog who wouldn't let go. That's the story people believe," he gestured to Ranger. "He never barked at the coffin, Daniel. He barked at the lie." Daniel stepped back, shaking. Everything inside him cracked. "You manipulated all of it," he said. "Even your death." Henry nodded. "I built a monster," he said, "and then I raised its executioner." Daniel reached behind him, grabbed the pistol from the table, raised it. Henry didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid to die," he said. "I already did." Daniel's finger trembled on the trigger. Ranger rose beside him, silent. Then Daniel lowered. "The gun. Death's too easy," he whispered. "You live with what you built." Henry smiled faintly. "I already do." Then he turned, walked out, disappeared into the snow. Daniel never saw him again. The leak shattered headlines for weeks. Military. Behavioral experiment exposed. Inside Project Lazarus. Weaponized children and the dogs who saved them. Daniel didn't watch the news. He couldn't. He and Ranger vanished. No trails, no signals. A cabin deep in the northern woods. One road in, none out. The world burned. In the rearview, let it. One night, weeks later, Ranger stirred in his sleep, whining, paw twitching. Then he jolted upright, stiff, alert. Daniel woke instantly. "What is it, boy?" Ranger growled low. Not at the window, not at the door. At the floorboards. Daniel stood. His pulse spiked. He moved the rug aside. Saw nothing. But Ranger scratched, hard, at a single plank, until it cracked loose. And beneath it, a box, wooden, nailed shut, old, dust-choked. Daniel pried it open with shaking hands. Inside a cassette tape, unlabeled. Just a single word carved into the lid. Next. He stared at it, heart in his throat. Then, a whisper behind him. Not from Ranger, not from outside, from the radio, which had been dead for weeks. It clicked on. Static filled the cabin, and beneath the static, a child's voice. Not crying, not screaming, singing, the same lullaby Daniel hadn't heard since he was 6 years old. He dropped the box. Ranger backed away, ears flat. The voice continued, "Lay me down and call me gone. The shadows sleep where I belong." Then, silence, dead silence. Daniel stared at the tape. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Ranger didn't bark, but he looked up at his master with a haunted gaze, as if to say, "It isn't over." The cabin stayed quiet for days. Daniel didn't play the tape. He couldn't. He stashed it in the cupboard beside the bullets he no longer trusted himself to use. Ranger stayed near the door now, always facing it, never resting. For long. Something had changed since the voice came through, like the silence itself had teeth. Daniel didn't shave, didn't speak, just moved, cut wood, fixed pipes, patrolled the woods with Ranger. They were alive, yes, but survival was hollow now. The war wasn't over, just hidden again, and hidden things always come back. One evening he sat at the table with Ranger's head on his lap. He traced the old scar near Ranger's ear, the one from that first lab, the place where obedience was carved into both of them like it was DNA. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything I made you be." Ranger didn't move, didn't flinch, just pressed closer. That was the thing about him. He didn't forgive. He just remained. Daniel lit the fire and watched it burn. Memories flickered in the glow, not in sequence, not in clarity. His mother's voice, the church basement, the night Ranger first protected him, the first time he said stop, and someone finally listened. A part of him had died the day he saw Henry alive. Another part was born when he didn't pull the trigger. It was strange. Monsters like Henry always expected revenge. What they never saw coming was restraint. In the days that followed, Daniel began to write, not to expose, not to fight, to remember. He filled a journal with every fractured piece of the past, each test, each mission, each nightmare. But most of all, he wrote about Ranger, the way his ears twitched in sleep, the way he barked when the truth was wrong, the way he never let Daniel face a door alone. It wasn't for publication. It wasn't for justice. It was for Ranger. Because one day he wouldn't be here, and Daniel knew he couldn't afford to forget who had carried him through hell. One morning, snow began to melt. Spring. Ranger was outside, staring at the trees. Still, quiet. Daniel stepped out, sipping black coffee. "You see something?" he asked. Ranger didn't answer. He never did. But the look in his eyes was different that day. Calm, unblinking, and then he sat as if to say, whatever it is, it can wait. Later that night, Daniel finally pressed play on the tape. But there was no lullaby, no child's voice, just breathing, slow, deliberate. Then a man's voice, familiar, rasped. "Henry, if you're hearing this, it means you let me live, which means I was right about you." A pause. "You're not your father's son anymore. You're your own weapon now, and that means they'll come for you. Not to kill you, but to use you." Static. "Don't let them." Another pause. Then one final line. "And if they take the dog again, burn the whole forest down. Click." Daniel stared at the machine, then at Ranger, then at the dark, endless line of trees outside. He didn't cry, didn't flinch, just nodded. He understood now. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to become what he did, and that meant waiting, watching, listening, for the bark. That night, as snow fell in soft sheets again, Daniel and Ranger lay beside the fire, the tape still turning in the player. And somewhere in the distance, beyond trees and time, another dog barked, just once. Then silence.